Hello, I'm Buddhima Padmasiri with the Department of Social Studies at the Open University. So today we are going to have a discussion on the constitutional process and the Public Representations Committee in Sri Lanka. So this is done as a part of the IMM component of Law and Politics, which is offered for the Level 5 students who are following the BA degree in Social Sciences. And we have three guests here today, and I warmly welcome the three of you to this discussion. We have Dr. Amar Surya from the Department of Social Studies, and Mr. Ilangovan, who is a consultant with the NGO Action Front, and Mr. Skanda Kumar, who is associated with the Social Scientist Association in Colombo. Thank you all for coming today. And to start off the discussion, why we are having this is because so this course unit is looking at how law and politics are interlinked. So by looking at the constitutional process altogether, we can see that these two, I mean, it's that law and politics, it's a place where both these are interlinked, and where the policy making is done by both the law academics and lawyers, and also there's the involvement of politicians and people and also civil society, etc. So to start the conversation, I'll ask Mr. Skanda Kumar to start off with if possible, to give us to tell us what is the importance of a constitutional process.
Let me thank you. Let me begin by saying some things in general. The constitution is a legal text. It is a law, but it is a law above all other laws, sometimes called the supreme law of the land. What's interesting about a constitution is that it's probably the legal text or instrument in which politics is most clearly visible or manifest. All laws are political, but it's in the nature also of legal ideology that law should somehow be seen as neutral, and therefore the language in which the laws of the land, statutes are often drafted, suggests some sort of neutrality. Politics, therefore, is often veiled when it comes to the operation of normal laws. But when it comes to the Constitution, here you can see a crystallization of the dominant political ideas of a particular society. So currently, in our current moment in world history as well as in history in Sri Lanka, we are talking about liberal constitutions or liberal constitution making. It's important to remember that there have been other moments in constitutional history and theory, for example, socialist constitutions as well as authoritarian constitutions, and these have also represented particular alignments of ideologies, political forces, particular ideas about the nature of a society and the direction in which it's heading. But a constitution, therefore, is a document, a legal text, which in its current phase of liberal constitution making is about setting out the key institutions and structures of the state and describing their interrelationships. It's also about the form of government of that particular state and how that government is constituted, how it comes into being, and therefore the process of the election. The Constitution today is also seen as an embodiment of the values or ideals or aspirations of a particular society, and that you will often find in the Bill of Rights, part or section of the Constitution. To draw this, to link this to Sri Lanka and to come to a close, the significance for us in Sri Lanka of a constitution making process, not dissimilar to experiences in many other countries around the world, therefore not unique to Sri Lanka, is that we are trying to do two things at least. One is, a new constitution is an opportunity for us to reflect on our criticisms, the shortcomings of the existing constitution. And this, perhaps to give an example, comes out clearest in terms of the critique of democracy, or the experience of democracy as expressed through the 1978 Constitution, and often specifically in terms of the role, the power that was given to a particular institution of the state, the executive, in the person of the executive president. So on the one hand, it's an opportunity to, it's part of an ongoing, always an ongoing contest between the people and the rulers, as to how much power the people wish the rulers to have and how they wish the rulers to exercise those powers. The balance or the distribution of that power is, of course, political. It depends very much on a relationship of forces between society and the state or the rulers, and it's also very contingent upon developments within that society. So, for example, societies that come out of particular political or economic shocks change the relationship of forces, sometimes in the direction of the ruler, sometimes in the direction of the people. So therefore, the kind of constitution you get is very contingent upon this sort of context or moment in which a constitution is being made. So that is one, at least one objective always of constitution making, how to rebalance or restructure power and the distribution of power between people and the rulers. There is a second, and that second is often more forward-looking. So a constitutional document often has these two phases, one looking back into the past of a particular society or country, but one also looking to the future, to the front, facing front, and asking what sort of society do we want? What kind of country do we want to build? And again, in relation to Sri Lanka, the debate is and a good illustration of the debate is also therefore about the relationship between different peoples or communities within this country, and therefore the distribution of power not just between the people as a collective and the rulers, but also the deconcentration of power and its devolution among different communities and different parts of this country.
Thank you. So that actually puts the background to this discussion, and with that I would now like to move on to talking about people's participation in a constitutional process. So today, I mean, both Dr. Amarasuriya and Mr. Ilankovan were members of the Public Representations Committee. So would you like to talk about that bit?
Okay, thank you, Buddhima. Yes, so when this whole constitution making process was initiated in Sri Lanka, I believe it was in December of last year, in 2015 of last year, that the cabinet appointed a committee to obtain the views of the people on what should be included in the new constitution and the sort of directions the constitutional reform process should take. I believe the only other time when the views of people were actually obtained for this constitution making process was in the Solberry constitution, when also there were wide consultations that took place in society on the nature of the constitution. So it was in many ways a very significant moment where people could actually express what they wanted out of constitution, and as Kumar so clearly said, the constitution is a reflection of the relationship between state and society, of people and its rulers, and people have to have a say in how that constitution looks. So I think 24 members were appointed to this committee. 20 members accepted the appointment, and we started work in January. If I were to describe that process a little bit, and then maybe Lanka can also sort of further elaborate on it, we were given a very unrealistic time frame, I must say, at the outset of 3 months to complete this task. And we started work in January, and it was very clear that it was going to take us longer than 3 months to do this. So we traveled to all districts of the country and had meetings with people. We also received a lot of submissions and representations through the post, through fax, through email, various means. And our task was to go through all those submissions and to prepare a report that summarizes or discusses all those submissions that were received by people, and to also provide some kind of recommendations for the constitution making process, which is actually taking place in the parliament. So the task that we were given was to obtain the views of people, to prepare the report and submit it to the committee, the subcommittee on that was chaired by the Prime Minister, the steering committee that was chaired by the Prime Minister, and then this report would be one of the means through which the parliamentarians then discuss and formulate the new constitution. That was our role.
So yeah, maybe I can take on from it. It was an interesting process in that also I think the parliament and parliamentarians were also learning through this process, and some of the steps actually started happening as we were also going through the process. For us again, it was a learning process for many of us, and therefore we thought we would work with the existing constitution as a sort of a frame in terms of the topics that we asked people to send in their representations to us on. There was some criticism about it because some felt that it should have not had a frame, that it should have been a blank sheet of paper, and people could then start sending in their representations without anything behind. However, we felt that there had to be some kind of a frame that was given to help people to make their representations, taking into account that constitution making is not necessarily seen as a layman's process. It's been perceived in our country, and I guess throughout the world, as something that is done by experts, legal minds, and maybe political scientists. So in that context, I would say I was surprised and actually pleasantly surprised to see the kinds of representations we received from the people throughout the country. They were informed representations. Some of them were very political in nature, in that they brought forward positions, different political positions that exist within the country. For example, there were those who clearly presented the need for a socialist character of the state, for example, through providing for social and economic rights, which is something which was not necessarily already in the constitution. So it's something new. There were those who brought forward the rights of the minority communities, positions on devolution, and interestingly, I think, as Harini was mentioning and Kumar before that, in terms of the contract between people and their representatives, people were talking about how they would like to renegotiate the agreement between themselves and their representatives who they are sending, on the terms on which they are being sent to Parliament, for example. So it was an interesting process, and I think there were quite a lot of representations that came forward. And though we cannot say that that there was a vast majority of people who participated, there was an informed group of people in the country, throughout the country, who brought in representations. And we also should say that they had also consulted, in many cases, it was not only individuals but also groups, which meant that there was a group of people involved behind drafting those proposals that they handed to us.
Okay, thank you. With that, I would like to come back to people's participation in this. So the Commission had actually received more than 4,000 representation submissions, right? So do you see that as adequate representation, or whether it is, like it's an informed group, most of them? So,
well, clearly, given that we have a population of over 20 million, that is an insignificant number if you look at it statistically. But I agree with what Elankovan said, that if you look at the quality of the representations, they were extremely valuable. Those 4,000 odd submissions that we received, and the representations often were collective representations, not individual representations. So they were from women's groups, from farmers' organizations, from ethnic minority groups, from different groups who came forward. And so those 4,000 actually also represent a larger constituency. But I think one of the limitations that we were working with, and that I mentioned right at the beginning, was the time constraint. People can't just appear before a committee and give representations on a subject like the Constitution. They also need to organize themselves. They need to mobilize. They need to think about things. All of this needs to happen. They need to be informed adequately that such a process is taking place. Had we had more time, I am quite certain we would have got far more. Right? So even in our own experience, what we saw was, as soon as we started the process, the submissions were few, and it picked up. Towards the end, we were working almost day and night coping with the representations that we received. So for example, when we went to places like Gaul, Munragala, Batiklo, all of us visited each of these districts. We often had to split into groups because there were so many people present there who wanted to give their submissions. So and I think the media also played a role in this, because they covered the entire process. The process was very transparent. Anyone could come and observe the sessions. So as people began finding out that this was happening, the interest picked up. So I'm sure, had we more time, there would have been more. But given the time constraints, we only had, I think we spent maybe 1 month doing the actual consultations. Given that, I think 4,000 odd submissions is fairly good.
Okay. So so you got various, these representations were of various nature, right? So this is a constitutional process, but that whole idea of people coming with their own issues also shows that, they believe in a constitution as if that would solve most of their issues. So that means they also give weight to this document, which some actually considered is something which only the elite politicians would engage with. No? Yeah.
So yes, I also think actually there was a lot of expectations, I think, that were there in terms of people bringing their problems forward also, and that required us also to be discerning in terms of also in making our recommendations, because all problems cannot be solved by constitutions. The constitution is basically, as Kumar said, like a supreme law or maybe a framework or a contract, and then how it operates, how it is made to function, brings thousands of people together in its operation. But it's also, going back to what Kumar said, it's also a time frame, and it is in this particular time frame that we are doing this constitution. And interestingly, maybe one can think a little bit about this process of new constitutions, because some states have constitutions which are there like for 300 years, like the US. But in Sri Lanka now, in the last 60 years of our independence, we have had now, this is the fourth constitutional process. Some people see this as problematic, but you can also see this as people and their state renegotiating, and therefore people come with their problems, and they would like to see how you can redraft this contract in a way that those problems are solved. And I think that can be actually a theme, because we've had a conflict in this country for over 30 years. There's been an ethnic conflict. We also have a population in the plantations of this country that have remained the most vulnerable. They were brought as slaves by the British, and they remain the most vulnerable and landless community in the plantations, with issues of which as a state we have not dealt with. There is extreme poverty, and development in Sri Lanka is confined to certain regions. So there is underdevelopment in other regions. So how do you actually deal with these issues? These were also issues that people brought to us.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Elankovan said, one of the things is, I think many people had the expectation that this constitution reform process will be mainly addressing the so-called national question, and the national question primarily defined in terms of the ethnic issue. But what we found was, yes, that is a major issue which needs to be addressed, and people all over the country address that. But people all over the country, I think fundamentally, and Lankovan, maybe you can also comment on this, I felt that the main problem that people felt was the lack of equality and justice in this country. That based on who you are, your ethnicity, your gender, your location, your sector, your employment status, the way you are able to access resources, access development is skewed and is very unequal. And people really wanted that changed. I felt that was a sort of an underlying theme in almost all the representations that we received. So even when people talked about power sharing, decentralization, devolution, all of that, the sort of motivation for their recommendations came from the need to have a less unequal society where people feel very distant from those who are making decisions on their behalf. So they actually wanted more control back towards them and be able to hold their representatives more accountable. This I felt you could see across the board. And I thought that was very, very significant and something that is very indicative of the kind of politics of our country for the last 60 years, that we have not succeeded yet in building a kind of citizenry which has faith or trust in the system, that they will, that if they go to some authority, that their problems will be heard and resolved without having to appeal to some higher authority or to use influence in order to get things done. I think people really do not like that and are beginning to really resent having to do that. and want a change in the way in which the state is structured and how that relationship is established between people and their representatives.
So, Mrs. Kandakuma, would you like to also add something to that? Looking at the constitutional processes which took place in the country in the past and this process, do you see, something?
Yes, we must be, we must have attained some sort of record for the number of constitutions in the last, excuse me, 100 years. We had 3 constitutions before 1948. We have now, we are in the process of drafting our fourth since the moment of independence. So I absolutely am of one view with the others on the significance and the importance of process. Often in these exercises, it's as if the end is what is most important. But if you get the process wrong, it doesn't matter how perfect the final outcome, it will simply not work. It will not take root or flourish. And I can perhaps best express this using a phrase from a Kenyan legal academic, the late Okoth Ogendo, who talked about constitutions without constitutionalism, and drew our attention to how you could have constitutions but simply not providing the sort of environment, the relationship between the state and society, rulers and the ruled, that you would expect from the letter of the Constitution. So in other words, in order for a constitution to take root and flourish, it can only do so in a ground that is receptive to those ideas, values and norms. Now, for that to happen involves a certain transformation. It is not something that can come from above. It cannot be grafted onto society. It must be the outcome of a society's own workings and searching for that sort of outcome, for that sort of end. And here is, I think here I want to simply raise in general the question of timing and sequencing. There is often in situations such as ours, where there has been a change of regime, and in the societies that are coming out of a traumatic recent past of war, to look for quick fixes, easy or short-term solutions to our problems. But another way of looking at it is to say, well, first, in fact, we try to move our society forward in the direction in which we need to go, and then through a process of consensus, we try to arrive at the document or instrument or constitution that best represents then our new understanding. Here I would suggest that perhaps we have short-circuited that we are still not yet a society that is ready for the kind of constitution that I believe we really need, and that therefore the outcome that we will have will in some ways not represent fully or entirely the direction in which we really need to go. And an illustration of then an example of that is South Africa. I do not wish to idealize the South African experience, but I think it's still important to see how they didn't immediately move into a final definitive constitution. There was a transitional or interim instrument, but allowing for several years of debate, dialogue and conversation in which political elites participated in direct engagement with society and vice versa. It's astonishing to think. It's difficult to fathom that 2 million submissions were received on the constitution on the draft constitution in South Africa within a short period of a couple of years. 2 million submissions in that society, and I must assume that there was a conversation about the constitution, which I'm afraid I don't yet see us even having here. A conversation that takes place in our homes, where families talk about what's going on, and at least one or two key issues in workplaces, in public spaces, and so on. That, it seems to me, it's still, regardless of the enormous efforts that were made by sections of civil society with the support of sections of the state and sections of the media to take this debate to the people. My own feeling as an outsider to this process is that it is still one in which too few of us have partaken.
Thank you. And with that, I will actually move on to some one more thing, which is the challenges now. I mean, unanimously the committee decided that, based on the representation, that economic and social rights should be included into the constitution. But now there is, discussion that it would not be a possible reality in the country, coming from also the economists and also people who are engaged in drafting the constitution itself. So with that, and Mr. Ilangovan pointed out minority rights and positions on devolution coming up as well. So what is the possibility of, also it's kind of speculating, but the challenges faced with, now there was a process where people actually engage, and whether the process of incorporating those recommendations and submissions into the constitution, the challenges which
I think the challenges go
Kumar
back to what
actually,
Kumar
yeah.
actually raised. I don't think this process can be rushed through. And what we see now is very clearly a huge gap between the aspirations of the people and the political elite who are actually now drafting the constitution. So all these people who are saying, no, you cannot have economic and social rights in the constitution are just basing their decision on their political ideology and expediency, right? So the constitution is ultimately for the people. You have to listen to what people are saying, and people are very loudly and clearly saying certain things. So you can't then initiate that process and allow people to express their views, and then for some elite group to come in and say, well, never mind what people said, this is what is possible, right? And we keep hearing this phrase, politics is the art of the possible. No, I actually get very annoyed when I hear that, because that is not what politics should be. Maybe politics is the art of the possible for politicians, right? But politics is about power and the transformation of power. And a constitution is about the contract between people. So there you can't limit your saying, okay, this is what is possible at this moment in time. Right? The constitution has to be a forward-looking document, as Kumar said. So, but you can't have that kind of transformation if you are just rushing through this process. And I think what is happening now, where that very consultative process has been now taken over by the political elite and a group within Parliament, shows that disconnect, and that ultimately, unfortunately, what we might have is not something that is representative of the views that were gathered by people, but something that is a compromise between those in power.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think there are lots of challenges. I mean, we understand this to be the year when, or next year 2017 to be the year when this constitution will be debated in Parliament, or at least the we have moved from the PRC report to reports of the subcommittees in 6 areas. We understand that the next step is for the steering committee to debate and come out with some of their understandings on the key issues or conflicting issues, and then for Parliament to debate these reports, and that they will also then go into a drafting process. Having said that, I would remain a little optimistic that many of the rights that people had requested and represented in the PRC report are also now represented in the subcommittee reports. But of course, as it goes into the debate process and then the drafting process, we have to wait and see what happens. But there is also the opportunity for people to continue to engage with their representatives, to continue to stress what they see as being what they are asking for, to continue to demand through the process, so that you put the kind of public pressure on the representatives who are making these decisions as we go forward. The other, of course, is that once the document is drafted, it has to be approved by two-thirds majority in Parliament, and then the Constitution has also to be accepted by the people in a referendum. So another interesting process, because we have had a referendum in the 1980s, which was a problematic process, and therefore this is a new process that we would engage the people in actually enacting this constitution, and that also requires for people to be prepared to know what they are voting for and against. So these are all challenges, but it also represents an opportunity for what people actually said, or what we heard people saying throughout the country, is that they are looking for a new constitution which will take us forward from here. So let's also be hopeful that there can be remedial measures, and also that people will play a positive role in it.
Okay, I think we covered a lot within this through this discussion. So with that, we talked about the people's participation, the importance of a constitutional process, and also the difficulties within this process, and also how actually a process what it should capture, and also optimism of this current process as well, which I think we should all look forward ultimately. So I take this moment to thank the three of you for coming today and taking part in this discussion. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.